Well, we're going to move in this study of spiritual warfare forward, but forward in the sense of identifying what is spiritual warfare. So we want to look at, for a couple weeks, the history of the battle. Where did the battle come from? And I'll lay this out in Genesis 1:1. Genesis 1:1 says, God, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Okay? What we know about God, to summarize, without taking you through a ton of scriptures, is that everything God does is perfect. He makes everything He makes great, right? It's a wonderful thing when it is done. So if God created that, and we know in Genesis 1:31, when He got done creating the earth, He said, oh, this is very good. It's very good. So there was nothing wrong at that point. And when God made everything perfectly, we have to ask this question. Okay, it says it was good. It was very good. Where did evil come from? How did evil exist in something God created? You either have to conclude that, well, then God created evil too, but we know God can't create evil because God is holy, and nothing evil and outside of His holiness can enter His presence. So we already know the answer to that question. He did not create evil. Then if you want to take that question and run with it a little bit, you could ask, well, if God didn't create evil, then was evil always there? And if evil was always there, was God not big enough or strong enough to stop it? Which is, it's kind of a junior high school question maybe to pursue a little bit, but it's worth pursuing in the sense that that's a fair question. Where did evil come from? If somewhere in the Bible it has to explain to us where evil came from, because God could not have created it. Yeah.
Didn't mean to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
I got a question.
Yeah.
I've asked this before. In Genesis chapter 28, chapter 1, verse 28. And in chapter 9, he says the same thing in verse 1. He talks about replenish, which to me means that at some point in time, when you're talking about the creation of Eden, at some point in time, there must have been something else that's not in this book.
Yeah.
I believe.
Yeah.
When he says replenish, it means replace.
Yeah.
He goes through, I've created all of this, it's good or whatever, but replenish means there was something else there before.
Yep.
I don't know what that is or what that was. Verse 1, it says, and darkness was, it was void and darkness was the only thing.
Yep.
But I don't think we have a clear understanding, or if you can help me there to understand that, what might have been in place. Would that might be where evil...
Yeah. So, and we're going to touch on this a little bit moving forward tonight. But in that sense, the Bible does not answer all of those questions. Okay. So what I have heard taught all these years is that there's a period of what we would call time between verse 1 and verse 2. Something happened after verse 1. Now, there is other teaching, to be fair, that says, no, it didn't happen after verse 1. It happened before verse 1. But I can't reconcile the time if it happened before verse 1. But basically, and we'll get into this tonight, something happened after, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Something happened after that point. So we don't know that could have been millions of years before we get to verse 2. Because tracking of time wasn't happening until He created the earth as we know it and created the days. So, with that, what happened? How long did it take? How long was that space of time between verse 1 and verse 2? We don't know. But we'll look at this in a second here. But yes, there's something there, and I think that answers the question. I think when you pull in the storyline of Lucifer, a created angel, which is where we're going, the history of the battle, he is in that storyline, and that is the storyline of something happened. What it was that happened, and we'll look at that shortly.
In Isaiah 14, devil or Lucifer says, I will send above the heights. I will be as, like the Most High.
Yeah.
And just outlines his flat out pride.
Yes.
That he was going to be as good as or better than the Creator.
Yep. Yep.
And there's something there, and I listened to a sermon Sunday. My sister goes to Tabernacle Baptist and Cater, and he was talking about, maybe you'll agree and maybe you'll disagree, but the pastor there was saying, that on the ark, Tyrannosaurus Rex was alongside of a camel or whatever, and I don't believe that. I just don't. There's some time there that something happened in that first, and I think he was trying to put everything together in a time window that I can't reconcile to my own understanding.
So what Dr. J. Vernon McGee says about that in relation to this, in context with the battle in and of itself, he said, what God revealed to us is what he wants us to know specifically about he and us. Okay? So there are things that we don't know that happened before the creation of man. He said, and God says it's not important that you know. Otherwise, it probably would be there, is his opinion. And I like that opinion. I think that makes a lot of sense because it dials us into the context of our relationship with him, how he created it, how he originally intended it to be, how we messed it up, and how he spends the rest of the Bible telling us how he fixed it. Right?
That's what the angel told Daniel. You don't need to know right now.
Yeah.
There'll be a time. And when you go to Hebrews in the 11th chapter, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen.
Yes.
Without faith, it's impossible to please God. I'm thinking in my own mind, the dinosaurs and this other stuff. I don't need to know. I mean, okay, it's there.
Yeah.
1 Corinthians 13 says, I see darkly now, but there'll come a time when I will see.
Yeah.
And when it's explained, just like Daniel.
Yeah.
But
I know that bothers some people when they don't have answers to specifics. I'm not worried. That doesn't worry me.
Yeah.
But when I went whitewater rafting, we were lucky enough to have a geologist on board, and apparently he also kind of liked dinosaur stuff. But he goes, "Isn't it odd?" And he believed in the flood.
Yeah.
In fact, he told us, about the flood when we went through the canyon. And if you don't believe in the flood, I'm getting chills. I get chills just thinking about it. You just need to go through the canyon. And he can, he really explained it well. But the dinosaurs are all found in piles, like where they drowned at the flood. And he goes, for some odd reason, dinosaurs weren't on the ark. Because they were, everywhere you find dinosaurs, there's a lot of them. There's not just one or two. Like the places they're digging up in Montana and Colorado.
Interesting.
They're beds.
Yeah.
There's lots. And they're in high places, and they're, there's food in their stomachs in the act. They found one in the act of giving birth. I mean, it was sudden, it was catastrophic, and so for some odd reason, the dinosaurs did not make it on the ark. I'm like, okay, I wasn't worried, but that's cool.
Yeah.
you have different species and different types of dinosaurs.
Well, yeah, because birds are dinosaurs.
Yeah, I watched a program the other night on PBS, and they were some archaeologists were in Alaska on the North Slope, and they were digging up dinosaur bones in Alaska.
Wow.
Kid you not? And like I said, I don't know. Just, I don't really want to waste any more time here.
Oh, it's.
But, there was something in my mind that there was something there that happened.
Yeah, yeah.
That's all.
And that's true. And I think, though, it's a great, your point is great because it does help us to really identify one thing. All of our questions aren't answered necessarily here.
Right. Yeah.
About all this. But there's what is answered is what God wants us to know to help understand. Yeah.
If birds are dinosaurs, and I've seen this on TV, a pet program,
Yeah.
and I'm not denying it, but there would have been dinosaurs on the boat too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Except that dinosaur and got that lead down where the ground was.
Yeah.
That's what
Yeah.
I'm talking about.
So these are questions, right? And there's more questions. Let me give you some more questions to think about here. Because there's questions that we have, and I think there's questions that are created by what the Bible tells us, and there's questions that are created by what the Bible doesn't say at all. And so, with that, how long ago, did God create evil? No, we know He did not create evil. So where did evil come from? When did God create angels? We know that there are angels. When did He create angels?
Before us.
Right,
Yep.
before us, and we'll find proof of that tonight. Was hell always there, or when did hell become a place? Because in Matthew, Jesus says hell was prepared for the devil and his angels. Was that always there? When did that come from? Right. So there's some questions there. Were there angels in heaven and in eternity who were in opposition to God? If so, did God let them live with Him? Because nothing in opposition to God could live with Him, so where were they, right? So that's, I'm kind of going to try to dial this in here closer. So with that, we know that couldn't be. It just couldn't be, because God says nothing can affront my holiness. What we see of His holiness and the views that we have in heaven, there is no chaos there. Evil is the opposition of God's holiness. Evil is the opposition of all things that are good, and God, there's no good, not one, Jesus said, other than who is good? The Father is good, and He is good. So if evil is the opposite of good, there's no way evil could have been living in heaven, coexisting with God. So something happened, right? That's what the premise is.
So Lucifer was made good.
Yeah.
He was a favorite.
Yes.
He was just the best there was. Then how did he get bad?
Well,
how did he go bad?
That's what we're going to look at tonight.
Please tell me.
That's what we're going to look at tonight. So, first of all, go in your Bible to Job chapter 38. Job is a great book, and it's kind of hard to read in one sense, because it's like, man, there's a lot of struggle in Job.
It's painful.
It is painful, but we learn a lot, and so we see some of this, a lot of conversations in Job, conversation between Job and his friends, and conversations between God and Job. And in chapter 38, we have a conversation where the Lord is speaking to Job. So the conversation is God's talking, Job is listening. All right? And He asks Job in chapter 38, verses 4 through 7. Chapter 38 of Job, verse 4. It says, where were you when I established the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who fixed its dimensions? Certainly you know. God, if Job was copping an attitude with God, God's kind of copping one back with Job here. He said, tell me if you know, Job. He said, certainly you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? What supports its foundations, or who laid its cornerstone? While the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy. Okay, that's what we want to look at, this verse. Who are the morning stars and who are the sons of God? It says, while I did all this, while the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy. So what is being described in verse 4, 5, 6 is God is saying, I laid the foundation for the earth. What do we see in Genesis chapter 1? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So God created, and he's giving you a little detail here. I laid a foundation. I set a line. I squared it up so it would be right. Were you there when I did that, Job? Let me tell you who was there when I did that, Job. The angels of heaven, the stars of the morning, and the sons of God. They shouted for joy when I did that. When I did that, Job, when I did that, they all were shouting because they were watching me do my thing. Right? I mean, that's kind of what's happening right here. So, with that, we can now add to Genesis 1 that the angels watched this happen. So the angels were already created when the earth was created. The heavens and the earth. So the heavens being the stars and the universes and the sun, all of that. So they're watching this and go, God, that was awesome. So, who are the morning stars and the sons of God? All right, now flip back to Genesis, because we see this word, the sons of God, used in Genesis chapter 6. We talked a little bit about this last week. Where evil comes from? Well, the sons of God are mentioned here in Genesis chapter 6. And it says, when mankind, verse 1, when mankind began to multiply on the earth, the daughters were born to them. The sons of God saw the sons of God. Who are the sons of God? There's the sons of God again. Here's the sons of God. The sons of God saw that the daughters of mankind were beautiful, and they took any they chose as wives for themselves. And the Lord said, my spirit will not always remain with mankind forever, because they are corrupt. Their days will be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth both in those days and afterward, when the sons of God came to the daughters of mankind, who bore children to them. And they were powerful men of old, the famous men. All right, so here's what Dr. Tony Evans says about that. Who are the sons of God? We're chasing this down. Who are the sons of God? He says the Nephilim in Genesis 6:4 are demonized men whose sexual intimacy with women led to a demonized society. All right, so these were demon-possessed men, and then they were cohabitating. They were having families, all right? He says they had to give themselves over to the powers of darkness, yet their dark powers were no match for God, who looked down and pronounced a window of 120 years to repent, after which would come the judgment. Now, let's talk about this for a second. We know one thing: angels cannot procreate. Angels can't make other angels. God made angels. So, there's procreation going on here, and a lot of it, because the whole earth was becoming corrupt from what was happening here. So what you have, and Dr. Evans talks about it, and others talk about it, what you have here is demon-possessed people who then have no room for God. Well, how do you become demon-possessed? Well, you have no room for God. So I don't want God around. So that opens the door for demonic possession, which we talk about it. We don't see it a lot here, but that doesn't mean it doesn't happen in North America. You hear it talked a lot about more in foreign countries, but because you hear it more in foreign countries because there has been less God in that sense in foreign countries. So what's happening here is that in the days of Noah, you had this entire body of the world who were turning more and more and more away from God, opening the door more and more and more for demonic possession. So they were having babies who were also then demonically possessed, right? They would open that door for that to happen, yes.
Then the angels would have been created as free moral agents.
Correct, and we're going to talk about that tonight.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, they made their decision to follow the devil and stuff, so they had to have free will.
Yep.
So they had free will also.
They did.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about that too here in a little bit. So
these demons are the cast out angels, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So the question is, were these the angels God created? Right? We're going to chase this down.
Okay.
But were these the ones God created? No, it's okay. So in Job, God says the sons of God. Shout,
He uses that same in Isaiah 14. Lucifer is described as the son of the morning.
He is.
Same as in Job 38.
He is.
That's interesting.
In that.
What did you say, Alan?
Say it again, Alan. We'll get there shortly, but say it again.
14:12 says, "How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? Thou art cut down to the ground, which did weaken the
Son of
nations."
the what?
Son of the morning.
Son of the
Okay.
morning.
Job 38:7, when the morning stars sang. So almost the same description.
Yeah.
Yes. So God sees them the way he created them, even though in other places, sons of God, like in Genesis, they're not walking with him, right? But how did he create him? I created him to be like me, kind of thing.
They all must have been there in heaven at one time, because Lucifer is described as the anointed cherub.
Yes. And they were all there, right? So you see the pieces coming together here. They were all there,
As we study through Revelation, you see 1/3 of the angels
Yes.
Yeah, took a third.
Yes.
called into following Lucifer.
Of possibly billions, quite frankly. So Tony Evans believes, because of the verses in Psalm that says, you have an angel protecting you, angels camping around me kind of thing. He believes that there most likely is an angel for every person on the planet at any given time. Well, now we've got, in theory, as many or more people than that has ever been on the planet, at over 7 billion people, heading to 8. Well, if there is an angel for each one of those, there's billions of angels, and a third of them went with Lucifer in the rebellion against God. We'll see, which means, though that's only a third, there's still 2/3. There's 2 good angels to 1 bad. Yeah, exactly, and God on their side, right? So you've got the sons of God in Job that says they cheered when God created. Okay, then we see them in Genesis again. They're in opposition to God. Go to Job chapter 1. Let's go there, because there's something very fascinating here. In both chapter 1 and chapter 2. Job chapter 1 says, "One day the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them. And the Lord asked Satan, 'Where have you come from?'" In other words, they were still, in a sense, required to give God an accounting. What have you been doing?
Mm-hmm.
Where are you at? Satan says to them, "I'm roaming throughout the earth," he said. "I'm walking around on the earth." And the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job?" All right, so we're going to see why that conversation transpired, but essentially here you see there is a time that they were to come to God and say, "What have you been doing?" Well, we've been walking around on the earth, which also, when we get to it, will tell us what we think might have happened between verse 1 and verse 2 of Genesis, okay? Flip over 1 page to Job chapter 2, verse 1. It says, "One day the sons of God came again to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them to present himself before the Lord. And the Lord asked Satan a question, 'Where have you come from?' And he answered again, 'From roaming through the earth and walking around on it.'" Or in the King James, it says, "roaming about to and fro on the face of the earth." So the sons of God present themselves to God. In other words, God has authority over them, right? They're coming to present themselves to God. There's a reason they come to present themselves to God. There must be a reason they come to, give an accounting of themselves. Well, they would only be giving an accounting of themselves if they are less than God. In other words, he has authority over them. And we know that God does have authority over all things. Yeah.
Satan has to know, Lucifer has to know he's a created being.
Yes.
He's smart enough to know that.
Yep.
So how in the world, in Isaiah 14, I will be like the Most High?
When we get to it, you'll see here in just shortly, it says, "Unrighteousness was found in you." And when unrighteousness is let go, right? Hate has no end, right? So all the evil things we've seen in the last 100 years because of hate, it blinds people, and it blinds personalities. I guess it blinds angels too. Well, let's go there. Let's go to Isaiah chapter 14. Let's take a look at this. There's two scriptures in the Old Testament, two passages that give us insight as to what happened. We know something happened. We know God could not have created evil. He did not create evil. We know that He is greater than evil because you see evil beings coming to God to present themselves, so He has authority over them. So it's not like He can't stop them. If He couldn't stop them, they wouldn't come to Him and bring themselves to Him to say, oh, here's what I've been doing. Because He's saying, I want to know what you've been doing.
Because that's what your dad does. What have you been up to?
Yeah, exactly.
What have you been doing?
Exactly. So we know that those two things have to be eliminated from the discussion. It wasn't that evil was always there because God wouldn't create evil, and it wasn't that He wasn't big enough to stop it because the evil beings are bringing themselves to Him. So what happened? All right, let's start with Isaiah chapter 12. Steve, if you have that, would you read, Isaiah 14, verses 12 through 17.
12 through 17, okay. How you have fallen from heaven, morning star, son of the dawn. You have been cast down to earth. You have once laid low the nations. You said in your heart, I will ascend to the heavens. I will raise my throne above all the stars of God. I will sit enthroned on the mount of assembly, on the utmost heights of Mount Zaphon. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. But you are brought down to the realm of the dead, to the depths of the pit. Those who see you stare at you. They ponder your fate. This is the man who shook the earth and made the kingdoms tremble, the man who made the world a wilderness, who overthrew its cities and would not let his captives go home.
All right. Interesting passage, isn't it? There's a lot in there.
It's almost the same thing. I mean, in Ezekiel 28, 17 through 19, he saw his own beauty and he was lifted up because it got away from him.
Yep. So let's go to Ezekiel, and then we'll look at these two passages together. That is Ezekiel 28. That is exactly right, Alan. Ezekiel 28, and it's verses 11 through 19. Ezekiel 28, 11 through 19. We'll look at this, and then we'll look at these two passages together, because we'll see what happened here. 28, 11 through 19 says this, starting with verse 11. Again, the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, take up a lamentation over the king of Tyre. We'll talk about that in a second. And say to him, Thus says the Lord God, you had the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was your covering, the ruby, topaz, and the diamond, the beryl, the onyx, and the jasper, the lapis lazuli, the turquoise, and the emerald, and the gold, and the workmanship of your settings and sockets was in you. On the day that you were created, they were prepared. You were the anointed cherub who covers, and I placed you there. You were on the holy mountain of God. You walked in the midst of the stones of fire. You were blameless in your ways from the day you were created until unrighteousness was found in you. By the abundance of your trade, you were internally filled with violence, and you sinned. Therefore, I have cast you as profane from the mountain of God, and I have destroyed you, O covering cherub. From the midst of the stones of fire, your heart was lifted up because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom by the reason of your splendor. I cast you to the ground. I put you before kings that they may see you. By the multitude of your iniquities, in the unrighteousness of your trade, you profaned your sanctuaries. Therefore I have brought fire from the midst of you. It has consumed you, and I have turned you to ashes on the earth. in the eyes of all who see you. All who know you among the peoples are appalled at you. You have become terrified, and you will cease to be forever. So here you have this description. What happened there? This is what happened. This is what God has revealed to us what happened. Lucifer was the shining one. So some of the versions have just shining one, and some of it have the name Lucifer. But Lucifer, the name Lucifer means the shining one. God created a host of angels, and he created them with differences. There were angels with specific purposes, but he created angels from a variety of purposes to serve the purpose of heaven. But he created Lucifer as the anointed cherub, the covering cherub, the one that was perfect. How perfect was he? Well, what it gives here, you were covered with stone. And I'm going to give you an example, you'll laugh. But I think about some of these, the rhinestone suits that the country singers wear, right? And they shine in the light. And think about that. In a way, that's what he did in heaven. When he walked, that just shone. It reflected the goodness, and it was like, look at that. Look at him. What was he doing? He was reflecting God. That light wasn't his. It was the reflection of God. And those jewels, those stones, all of that reflected. So it was kind of like a rhinestone suit in that sense. So all of that was in there. But he was the anointed cherub. In other words, there was none greater than him. Some believe, and I've heard this teaching through Tony Evans, that he actually was the archangel. He was in charge of all the angels, right? That there would have been 3 archangels, Lucifer, Gabriel, and Michael. And so with that, when you see that Michael was wrestling with the devil over the body of Moses, he didn't rail out on him, right? He said, the Lord rebuke you. Why did he do that? Because ultimately he was created to be accountable to Lucifer at one point, right? And so I heard Tony Evans say that too, that he understood that, at one point Lucifer had rank on him. So he said, the Lord rebuke you. So just a little insight on some of these things. You see these little things and you kind of have to string them all together to get it. But covering, the covering cherub in the midst of sun. So he was beautiful. But what happened was he became enamored with his own stuff. And pride is the biggest sin, right? It's the first sin. It's the one that God hates the most. Partly because it was the first sin. Pride was the first sin. And because of the pride, and you touched on it just a while ago, Alan, that all of that, all of that happened to him came from his pride. He thought, well, I'm so good, I could have God's chair. It's the old joke about the politician sitting in God's chair. Goes to God and says, who are you? Well, I'm so-and-so the politician. You're sitting in my chair, right? Yeah. So, but Satan wanted God's throne. And he says, I'm going to be above him. I'll sit above him. I'll run this show. And so it was a coup, so to speak. We would call it a coup. So when you look at that, and then you connect that with Isaiah, how have you fallen, star of the morning? He's identified as a star of the morning, son of the dawn. And part of the pride then, he says, well, this is what I'll do. 5 times he says, I will. I'll do this. I'm going to do this. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to take over for God. In fact, I'm going to sit above God. But he was a created being. All angels are created beings by God. Now, angels are more powerful than you and I are because we were created where? A little bit where? Yeah. So we are bound by things that they are not bound by, like physical. We can't walk through a wall, but an angel could. We've seen examples of that. They can kind of come and go, appear, disappear. We can't do that, And God did that with a purpose. But with Satan, he was the brightest star. Lucifer was the brightest star. He was the star of the morning. He was and in that sense, he was in charge of all the angels. Therefore, when it talks about back in Isaiah, of his trade. Isaiah. What he was doing was he was going around trying to convince all these other angels to join in with him. Oh man, you got to come with me. What do we know about him? He's a deceiver. Come on, man, we can do this. We can take God. We can overtake them. We'll run the show. To the point that his name was changed, because names with God identify the character of who they are. So God has so many names because he cannot be contained. His character and who he is cannot be contained with one. So Satan's name, I'm getting a little bit ahead, but I'm going to tell you this while we're here. Satan's name was changed from the Shining One, and it says here, darkness was in him. He was like ash. Well, his name was changed to the devil and Satan. He has two names. Satan means the opponent, the adversary, the accuser, and the devil means slanderous and deceiver. So, aptly named in that sense. So we see what happened here. Pride overtook him, but he also had envy because he wanted God's seat. So not only was it pride, what was the unrighteousness? Okay, pride. You said in your heart, I will send ahead into heaven. He had envy. He wanted something that rightfully could not be his. He wanted God's throne. So he was envious of that. He was unrighteous in that sense. He was filled with violence because one of these things leads to another. What are these? These are all examples of our society. Filled with violence. By the abundance of your trade, verse 16, it says, you were internally filled with violence and you sinned. Well, you're in heaven. How can you have violence? Something's happened internally with you, right? He was profane. Verse 16, therefore I have cast you as profane from the mountain of God. So, from the pride, that came. He was corrupted. Verse 17, your heart was lifted up because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom by reason of your splendor. In other words, you started believing your own stuff. All that wonderful things people were talking about you. And you wonder, how can these national, Brett and I were talking about this today, some of these national ministers, these mega church pastors, how can they fall? Because they become enamored with their own stuff. And they start listening to what everybody's saying about them. And they start checking their social media, what they say about me today, And they want to become great. They want to become great instead of making God. They want to become famous instead of making God famous. Right? So he was corrupted by, his heart was lifted up by his beauty. You were corrupted by your wisdom. And then the seventh thing is, and you sinned. So if you look at that progression, there was a point where he probably could have stopped. As there is with all of us with temptation, right? There's a point where we go, I got to stop. No, I want that cookie. I want the cookie. I need to stop eating the cookie. No, I want that cookie bad, right? Think back when we were kids and we learned right from wrong. And we always got caught. But in that sense, there was this point where you say, well, that's fascinating. God created angels, but then God also created, where did we start with this self-will? Right? He gave them self-will like he gave us self-will. And so in that, in this book, Handbook for Spiritual Warfare, which I did not bring tonight, I'll bring it next week, Dr. Ed Murphy says this: freedom of choice, if it is untested, freedom of choice is theory only. If free will, self-will, is untested, it's only theory. Therefore, angels and mankind had to face the choice between obedience to God and disobedience. Will I be obedient to what God says is right, or am I going to do my own thing? Self-will, then, is tested in that moment to say, I'm going to do what God says is right, or I'm not going to do what God says is right or wrong. Thoughts on any of that?
What's the name of the book?
It is called the Handbook for Spiritual Warfare. I'm not sure it is in print in hardcover right now, but iBooks, Apple Books, has it coming out in February, the first week of February, and I'm going to get a copy of it when it comes out.
Yeah.
But I'll bring it next week so you can see that.
That's a scary thought. I guess God didn't create robots.
He did not.
But if no one was ever tempted, he wouldn't know.
Correct.
If you were following, if he was, because he wants your heart. I think
Yeah.
he wants your heart.
Yeah.
That's what I was just thinking. He wanted his angels to be behind him.
Right.
They could have the joy of following him and being a part of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But then, wouldn't that be heartbreaking when a third of them would leave? That would be horrible.
Mm-hmm.
But that's kind of what you do to your children.
Yes.
And they can be very, very rebellious. And
Yes.
come back and leave again and come back.
Yes.
Especially,
So is an angel once fallen always going to be fallen?
Yes. So a couple of questions on that is, why don't angels have the chance for
Yeah.
redemption? I
Yeah.
have read now in a couple of commentaries that the nature of God would have been to give them the opportunity for repentance, because that is what we know the nature of grace of God would be. There's nowhere in the Bible that I think supports that. I think that was someone's theory. The other is that, and this was a Tony Evans quote in his commentary, is that there was a trial held in heaven because God would hold a trial. Here are my standards. Did you meet my standards? And we would see that that would follow through. If God is bringing these angels in for accountability, where have you been? What have you been doing? It makes sense that there would have been some kind of trial. What did you do? Why did you do it? He did that with Adam. Who told you were naked?
Yeah.
but see, then in order for us to repent, he had to send his son.
Correct.
So how could the angels repent?
The difference is that the Bible says we were deceived.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, that's true.
We were deceived by the deceiver.
Right.
Satan, Lucifer, was in heaven at God's presence and chose at that point, no, I'm not going to do this. I want to do my own thing. Satan is the deceiver. He is the one who deceived Eve.
Because that's what he tricked me. He
Yeah.
deceived me.
Yep. And that is the difference. Therefore, God says, I'll fix this. I'll fix this. And in Eden, that promise was to make this right, so that we could be with him in the way that he intended for us to be with him. But there's still one more. Anything else on that? Because there's one more question we haven't answered yet. I don't want to answer it before we're done. But any more on that? This is deep stuff, I get.
It is.
But it does answer the question, how did this happen? All right, so we started out in Genesis 1:1 and said there's a space of time. There's something in there between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2. Okay? What happened? So, when this rebellion in heaven took place, and a third of those angels were part and parcel to that, Matthew 25, verse 41, Jesus says, he will turn to say of those on his left, depart from me, accursed ones, into the eternal fire, which has been prepared for the devil and his angels. All right, so Jesus identifies what hell is for. Hell is for that place. So we know that is their end place, but what happened to them? If they couldn't live in God's presence in heaven, what happened? Well, he said in, is it Luke? In Luke chapter 10, verse 18, I watched Satan fall from heaven like lightning. And some really smart people with doctor at the beginning of their name, I have read, say he was talking about not only that moment of that, but he was also saying, this is what I saw. I watched Satan fall from heaven. And what did we see in Ezekiel? You're cast to the ground. Okay? Where is their ground? Well, there's ground on earth. So the theory is this, cutting to the chase. The theory is this, is that once that accounting was happened in heaven, call it a trial, whatever you want to call it, that God said, you can't live here anymore, and Satan was cast to earth. All right, Genesis 1:1, God created the heavens and the earth. Most likely, God didn't create it without form and void, because that's not like his nature. He makes stuff great. But in Genesis 2, it says, earth was formless and void. Darkness was upon the face of the deep. Now, why was there darkness there? Well, if Satan was cast to the ground, that's the ground. What Tony Evans put it this way, he says, everywhere Satan goes is dark. What that actually says in Hebrew, I think, is tohu abohu, which is a garbage dump. You could translate that to mean the earth was like a garbage dump. And where Satan goes becomes a garbage dump. And Tony Evans says, including your life, if you let him in. Yes.
Paul says in Ephesians, he's called the prince of the power of the air. So he was cast to earth. He's now the prince of this world.
Yes. And which also explains, how did he end up in Eden, the garden of God, with Eve going, hey, sweetheart, did God really say that? Also, we see in Ezekiel, you were in Eden, the garden of God in heaven. Isn't it fascinating that he had a place in heaven called Eden where he lived, that he got kicked out of there. Adam and Eve then had a place named Eden, that God put them in there because God's purpose by creating man was to say, Satan, here's the deal. I'll prove to you that mankind, who doesn't have as much power and ability as you, can still serve me and do greater things because they're connected to me than you can on your own. And I'll give them a place to live. So he created Eden for Adam to live in. And he made Adam this perfect human, like Satan was, Lucifer was this perfect angel. So the comparisons there, you can get deep and wide on that once you start to say, wow, that's amazing. So does that answer your question? Not every theologian agrees with that. Some think that the whole Satan was kicked out before Genesis 1, but I can't reconcile him on earth prior to that. The timeline doesn't work for me, and there's enough of theologians and commentaries that say, yeah, it happened between 1 and 2, that's where I land with it. You might find other commentary on that. Replenish the earth, because it was great before Satan got here. He destroyed it. I want you to make it great again. Yeah, you replenish it. So the other thing is this, and I'm going to throw this out. I don't think I agree with this fully, but I'll throw it out, that maybe the earth is millions of years old. Okay? When God created it, maybe it really is millions of years old, but our timeline from Adam on is only 6,000 years old. Yeah. So if they go deep and they say, yeah, this is millions of years old, maybe it is, if that's what God did, and then Satan ended up here, and then from the time that God recreated it was the point that we know, the creation of Adam and the start of time.
You can go down to Tuscola or Charleston. There are quarries down there. Or you could go over to Decatur and look at the oil fields. But those quarries have buku number of brachiopods. From a shallow sea environment. So at one time there was an ocean over Tuscola and Charleston.
Yeah.
You could go to Cincinnati. It's called the Cincinnati Basin, but all around the city of Cincinnati, the road cuts and whatever, just a gazillion fossils of shells that are right there. So at one time there was an ocean there.
Yeah.
But when that was, I can't reconcile in my own mind that happened in the last 6,000 years.
Right.
But I think at some point in time, in that period,
Yeah.
but I don't,
There's things we don't know, and the Bible is silent on some of that, and it's okay, I think one of the best descriptions of some of this is the answers in Genesis and the Ark people, down there. They've got so many things, I think, that help communicate what it is. Now, Ken Ham is an absolute, the earth is 6,000 years old. It is not older than that. And so his perspective is that, and I totally respect it. I do think what we know and the timeline and from this that I handed out the other day, I mean, it's pretty obvious. From the point of Adam now, it's been 6,000 years. There's no other,
I think, isn't that why all the generations are named?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you can follow it.
Exactly. Why is all that in there? That is in there to help us understand the timeline to Jesus. Because why is that important? It's important to say, God says, I'm going to have a man, I'm going to have a second Adam, as Paul called him the second Adam, who will do this right this time, who can redeem mankind. Well, this tells us that timeline to get us to that, to get us to Jesus, which is what the Bible is all about anyway. So I think the debate, I mean, there's merit to saying, is the earth millions of years old? Yeah, I think you can make a case for it with Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 and something happening in between. That's the only way that works in my mind, if that helps.